This is MTG Burgeoning, and in this video we are going to update and upgrade our Magar of the Magic Strings EDH deck. Thank you for joining us once again for another installment of the Up and Up series. Today we are updating and upgrading our Magar of the Magic Strings EDH deck. If you are unfamiliar with Magar and all of his Unfinity madness, then you can look in the description below and click on this build's deck tech. You can also click on this build's up to the moment deck list, and you can also see and view and observe and watch this build's video primer series. We've got some cards going into the 99 and some cards coming out, so let's kick things off with our first new card to Magar. It is Hostile Negotiations. We have an instant here for 3 and 1 black mana. We exile the top 3 cards of our library in a face-down pile, then exile the top 3 cards of our library in another face-down pile. We look at cards in each pile, then turn a pile of our choice face up. An opponent chooses one of those piles, we put that pile into our hand and the other into our graveyard, and we lose 3 life. This is going to cause our opponents so many fits in this type of build. We want as many big, mana-busting instant and sorcery spells in our graveyard as we can possibly get, so that we can activate Magar's ability, get them onto our side of the battlefield as creatures, and then reap the benefit of casting copies of their spells when they deal combat damage to our opponents. So our opponents are never going to know which cards to put into our hand and which cards are going to go into the graveyard, because we have so many spells in our deck that are going to take cards from our hand and discard them into our graveyard. So one way or another, with Hostile Negotiations, we should most likely get any cards that we can into our graveyard in order to make Magar of the Magic Strings pull those magic strings. With Hostile Negotiations going in, coming out of the build is going to be Siphon Mind. I almost said Siphon Soul. Here, we have a sorcery with the same mana value as Hostile Negotiations. It's 3 and 1 black mana, of course, and each other player discards a card, and then we draw a card for each card discarded this way. Yes, we are hurting our opponents by having them discard their cards, and yes, we are drawing a card each time our opponents do that, and yes, that does help to flip the resources into our favor. However, if you're sitting across someone or next to someone at the EDH table that wants those cards into their graveyard, well then having Siphon Mind as one of our Magar 3/3 of creatures is not going to help us to win the game. So we're going to replace a spell by not helping our opponents and helping just ourselves instead. We're going to get cards into our hand and cards into our graveyard, as opposed to getting cards into our hand and cards into our opponent's graveyard with Siphon Mind. So with that swap, we're putting more of the focus on what we want to do and helping ourselves, as opposed to incidentally or peripherally helping our opponents. Card number 2 going into Magar here in this installment of the Up and Up series. It is Hit the Motherload. Look at that beefy mana value of 4 and 3 red. Magar doesn't care. It only costs 1 generic and Rakdos colors to make this a 3/3, and if it strikes one of our opponents for combat damage, then we're going to make a copy of this card. We're going to discover 10, and if the discovered card's mana value is less than 10, we're going to create a number of tapped treasure tokens equal to the difference. To discover 10, we're basically cascading through our library until we find a non-land card with mana value 10 or less. In this deck, that could really run the gamut, folks. If you're looking at the deck list or you have some familiarity with the 99 of this Magar build, Discover 10 could be a lot of different things. And even if it's only a 1 or 2 mana cantrip spell or rummage spell, well, guess what? We're going to reap the benefit of those tapped treasure tokens, which is just going to help us to activate Magar's ability more frequently. We're going to accelerate our mana. We're going to out-resource our opponents. And it's all going to happen if we hit the Motherload. So with that 7 mana value spell going in, Taking its place is another 7-mana spell, one that does not have the same impact as Hit the Motherload will, and that is Sorin's Vengeance. Another sorcery here. This one's 4 and 3 black versus the 4 and 3 red of Hit the Motherload. Here, Sorin's Vengeance deals 10 damage to target player, and we gain 20 life. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm all about 20-point life swings. There's no problem about that. However, it's just not as far-reaching or as impactful as what Hit the Motherload can do. The tapped treasure tokens will eventually untap and lead to accelerated mana, and the spell that we're cascading into from the top of our library in one way, shape, or form is going to improve our battlefield or our resources. With Sorin's Discovery, we're just moving some dice around. I'm sorry, with Sorin's Vengeance, not Sorin's Discovery. We're just going to move some life totals around. I'd rather have Hit the Motherload than Sorin's Vengeance, and I think Magar would agree. All right, our next card going in, we've got 2 left. New card number 3. Oh, Magar loves that card, and it is Rise of the Alrazy. We've got a sorcery here for 9 and 3 colorless mana. Note it is not generic mana. Those 3 diamonds must be paid for with colorless mana. That will not be a problem in this build thanks to our many mana rocks. Once we cast Rise of the Alrazy, a spell that cannot be countered, we destroy target permanent, and then target player draws 4 cards, and then we take an extra turn after this one, and then we exile Rise of the Alrazy. Now, in this Magar build, we just want to get this card into our graveyard, and once we do, we activate Magar's ability, 1 black and a red, we get our 3/3, and then we don't have to worry about pumping 12 mana into this spell. Although we have the means to do so, this deck is all about casting these big spells for free by turning them into creatures with Magar's ability. And once we do, and this deals combat damage to an opponent, we most likely win the game. Because if our opponent or any other opponent at the table could have removed this creature from combat, they would have done so the first time so that we wouldn't take extra turn after extra turn after extra turn. It can and will happen in this deck, and Magar approves with all thumbs up. All right, with Rise of the Alrazy going in, it is going to replace Grave Endeavor. Here we had an instant for 5 and 2 black mana. We rolled 2d10, and then we chose one of the results. We return a creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to that result, and then each opponent loses X life and we gain X life, where X is the other result. So here, more often than not, we were really looking to try to life drain the board. But I think when we're looking at the abilities of what Rise of the Alrazy can do when compared to Grave Endeavor, I'm pretty sure we're coming out on the win there by swapping in the 12-mana sorcery, which we don't have to worry about with Magar, for the 7-mana instant. All right, our last card going into our Magar build today, and it will conclude our installment of the Up and Up series. It is Desecrate Reality. Here we have an instant for 7 generic mana. For each opponent, we exile up to 1 target permanent that player controls with an even mana value. Keeping in mind that lands carry a mana value of 0. So yes, we could exile some lands, and boy oh boy, wouldn't our opponents just love us at the EDH table for doing so. Also, through its Adamant mechanic, if at least 3 colorless mana was spent to cast the spell, we return a permanent card with an odd mana value from our graveyard to the battlefield. That most likely will be more miss than hit, because we're really putting this card in there for the ability to exile up to 1 target permanent that a player controls with an even mana value. And as long as we keep swinging in with combat damage from the 3/3 that this will be created with Magar's activated ability, yes, it is possible to ensure that we have no lands on our opponent's sides of the battlefield, but do take caution, because that could mean that we may not have any opponents with which to play Magic. With Desecrate Reality going into the 99, it is going to replace Cabal Conditioning. This was a sorcery for 6 and 1 black mana. Any number of target players each discard cards from their hands equal to the highest converted mana cost among permanents we control. This was a little bit of a hit or miss thing. Again, this harkens back to what we were talking about with hostile negotiations and Scythe in mind. We're trying to be a little more proactive with board state and our resources, and not so much with the cards that are in our opponent's hands, particularly with the oh-so-popular graveyard archetypes that are out there. It's best to let our opponents try to get those cards into their own graveyards than us doing it for them. So with that in mind, Cabal Conditioning is out, and Desecrate Reality is in. And there you have it, MTG BC. 4 new cards for Magar of the Magic Strings. Let me know your thoughts about these changes in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.